Okay, hi everybody. I'm Sam Popowich. I am the digital infrastructure librarian and head of systems at University of Winnipeg. And my talk was entitled "The Pragmatics of Systems Librarianship." I had initially proposed a full session, which was going to go into some nitty-gritty things. But the lightning talk version of this doesn't really have to do with pragmatics. So forget the title. Which is the clicker thing? Oh, here it is. Gotcha. Okay, great. Okay. So um, I moved to the University of Winnipeg from the University of Alberta just a little over a year ago. And I was excited that Access would be in Halifax because I did my library degree here at Dalhousie back in 2005, 2007. And so I thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of um, take a step back and reflect on the three universities that I've worked at since then, um, the kind of differences in scale and the differences in ways of approaching systems librarianship in those three contexts. Um, and it's interesting, the first email that I got about Access was from Peter, which reminded me that back when I was here in 2005, 2007, Peter came and talked to my class at Dalhousie about being a systems librarian. And that was probably the first time that I realized that you could actually be a systems librarian. And until then, I was going to be a liaison librarian. And basically at that point, I probably switched. And then the other sort of important influence at the time was Mark Leggett, who had come from the University of Winnipeg, where I am now, to take up the chief librarian position at UPEI. And he came over several times to speak at Dal as well. Um, and I think both of them kind of gave me a sense of the importance of open source, the importance of kind of the more concrete ways to approach systems librarianship. Because in library school, the concrete ways of dealing with technology can sometimes be a bit vague or shift a little bit. So being back here now, 17 years after starting in library school, is a good way to sort of think about being a systems librarian. Perfect. Okay. Um, so I started in 2008 at the University of Ottawa, and I have the numbers from the Carl survey from 2019, which says that at the time, U of O had about 38,500 FTE, 48 librarians, and 147 total staff, so fairly large. University of Alberta, I was there for 10 years, 39,000 students. It said 75 librarians. I don't think we ever actually had 75. We're like 60-ish, but still a lot, 238 total staff. And then last year I moved to the University of Winnipeg, which has about 7,000 students, 14 librarians, and 42 total staff. So much different context. And I think that one of the things that we talk about a lot, one of the things that the conversations that's kind of been, if not central to Access, has come and gone through Access conferences since I started coming regularly about 10 years ago, is this question of what's specifically cultural to so every library is different. In Canada, every university is different. Every library is different. It has its own culture. They have their own cultural problems. And where do those come from? Do those come from objective factors like size and budget, or do those come from sort of more amorphous, um, sort of organic things that arrive from the people who work there? And I think there's no end to that conversation because there's no final answer, but it is the kind of thing that we do tend to talk about quite a lot as technology librarians. Where do some of these issues come from? Why do we approach machine learning or AI at particular times in particular ways? How do we balance more conceptual thinking, like Hannah was talking about, with the nuts and bolts of operating library technology? And I think that budget and size does have something to do with it. It's obviously not the whole story, it's not the end of the story, but having moved between three universities, two of which were at one sort of scale and one of which is at a much smaller scale, I think you can start to see some of the ways that those differences affect the way we approach the work. So, these are kind of three main differences that I've noticed over the years. The division of labor between sort of having a single focus and having a multiple focus. The larger the university, the more often we have very tightly defined roles with perhaps narrower sets of responsibilities. In some ways, that can feel limiting, depending on who's in them and what kind of work they see themselves doing. But in some ways, that can be freeing because you are able to focus more on particular narrow pieces and become an expert in them. So when I was at University of Ottawa, I was emerging technology librarian, which is a title that I think has disappeared, even though back then that was a very popular title. And I was very heavily focused on new library technologies, but next generation catalogs, we called them, discovery systems, open source software, JavaScript libraries to do particular things, libguides, which were brand new, things like that. Um, I did have reference shifts, but I had no liaison work. So it was a very tightly focused position. At U of A, I was the discovery systems librarian and eventually head of discovery and web services. At the beginning, there were some reference shifts, but U of A shifted to pull all of the librarians off the reference desk at a certain point, which is one of those kind of large cultural things that can happen in libraries that sometimes we feel engaged in, sometimes we don't. Sometimes it can kind of feel like it just sort of is a decree that comes down, those kinds of things that happen. So again, that was fairly narrowly focused. As my responsibility shifted outside of purely discovery towards more web services, there was more to think about, more to work on, more relationships to foster. So one of the things about the single focus is you have very little to do necessarily with other organizations in the area. So because I didn't see many people from other institutions, I helped start a Code for Lib chapter in Edmonton, which helped bring together technology people from the different institutions. As I sort of my work shifted, I became more officially involved in work that other people were doing. So Jason's here. I worked with Jason on migrating their ILS database to from locally hosted at U of A to hosted by the vendor. And so that kind of shift happens over time. And that's very much dependent on whether the work is conceived of narrowly or more broadly. At U of W, technically, digital infrastructure librarian doesn't say very much, but head of systems means that I supervise the very small team of system staff at the U of W. But I also have liaison focus. I do teaching, I do reference, I do collection development. So it's a much broader focus. We're doing a little bit of everything. And that's partly because we're much smaller. Every librarian has multiple streams that they're responsible for. It's also the kind of back room versus public focus in systems. So whether you're working primarily on scripting and infrastructure or the more public facing systems, that changes, that has changed over time. And then support versus agency. Another split in the libraries is whether you as technology staff or technology librarians are seen more as support for the quote real work of the library, which is supporting students, researchers, or faculty, or whether you're considered to have your own projects and your own initiatives and your own agency within the library. And that can change as well. And then probably the two major differences that I would say. One is relationship with campus IT, and this is another conversation that comes and goes all the time throughout the Access conferences. I absolutely sort of from a philosophical level agree with someone like John Fink that the more we can own our own stacks, the better off we are. And when I was at a larger university, I could promote that view a lot better because we had higher budgets and we had more capacity. Now that I'm at U of W, I'm like, well, there, there's a pragmatic way to think about this. If we push some things off into the cloud, or we let campus IT take some of it over, then maybe we actually have more capacity on the stuff that really matters. So this ties back to Stacy's comment about what do we let go? What do we hold on to? I've identified at U of W a certain core set of services that I want to hold on to within the library because to me they're vital to what we're doing. The other things, in other contexts, I might have held on to them. Now I would much rather send them to campus IT or send them to the cloud or something like that. Um, Relationship building is always a difficult one, but I think the more we, in smaller libraries, if we take that pragmatic perspective, the easier it is to sort of compromise with campus IT. And it helps to clarify what it is that we actually want, which in larger universities, larger libraries is sometimes difficult to have that conversation. We want it all. So being a bit more pragmatic about what we want, what's feasible, what's realistic and achievable is useful. And then the big one, obviously, is money. Um, there are massive cultural effects to having large staff and large budgets. One of the things that I really noticed at somewhere like U of A is it was possible um, to go after big projects, to do new things, to do exciting things, and to not really worry about what the budget would be or what the costs would be. That changed, you know, probably changed twice while I was there when the provincial government decided that, in fact, the University of Alberta shouldn't have the amount of money that it has. But for large swathes of time, um, U of A budgets were large enough and stable enough that we could say, there are things that we want to go after, and we can be idealistic about it. Um, Sometimes that might paint us into a corner, but we didn't have to have necessarily that pragmatic discussion or pragmatic decision point at the very beginning. Um, so costs and benefits. I talked a little bit about the differences. Some of the costs, I would say, of being in a smaller versus, or yeah, some of the smaller um, libraries versus the bigger library, is that you do have limited resources. You have to be careful about how you deploy them. You have to be pragmatic. You have to compromise. It does mean that you can't be involved in all of the cutting edge things. So we're not involved in linked data projects at U of W. We're not involved in AI except in terms of talking with faculty about how they teach. We're not doing technology projects around AI or machine learning. But, and these are the benefits, we get to do a little bit of everything. All of my staff have little bits and pieces involved in all areas of library technology, except some of the big new ones. Um, that set that they are involved in, we're more focused about it. We have to be more selective, and that concentrates us. So within that narrower scope, everybody gets to do a little bit of everything. And then can't be involved in all the cutting edge things. So I think that's a cost and a benefit. There are times when I wish that we could be more heavily involved in some newer, more interesting things that are happening on the horizon. And there are sometimes I'm just really glad that we just don't have the budget or the people to pursue it. I don't have to think about it. So that's great. And I think that was it. That was all I really wanted to talk about. I think that you can tell there's a difference when you've worked kind of one or two places versus when you've moved around a little bit. I think moving around, if there's anyone here who's still in library school or has just finished, move around a little bit if it's possible. I know it's not possible for everybody, but there is a benefit to working in different kinds of institutions, different sizes, different locations. The culture is always going to be a little bit different, and culture is really the biggest benefit to working in academic libraries, and it's also the biggest sort of obstacle to having a decent career. So there you go. Thanks.